So we're going to start this video by pointing to the bone features that are inside of the orbit. They all belong to the sphenoid bone. So the first one would be this rounded hole over here, which is the optic canal where the optic nerve goes through. And the next two, as you can see, the holes are a little bit more elongated, so they're not rounded, and they're called a fissure. So the top one would be called the superior orbital fissure inside of the eye, and the bottom one is going to be called the inferior orbital fissure. Continuing with the sphenoid bone, which is also known as the butterfly bone, you can see that it has sort of a butterfly shape right over here. You can see on a different view the optic canal, and right over here on the side would be the superior orbital fissure. Now the sphenoid bone also has three more holes, which is right over here, 1, 2, 3. So the first one is what we call the foramen rotundum. The second one, see how it's oval? It's called the foramen ovale. And the third one is called the foramen spinosum. So if you can remember ROS for rotundum ovale spinosum. Then the next bone feature is this bone feature right over here, which is really important. So it's sort of like a depression. It's called the sella turcica, which is going to house your pituitary gland. So it's really, really important. Then we can go over here to the ethmoid bone. So this part over here belongs to a bone, which is called the ethmoid bone. On the ethmoid bone, you see these little tiny holes over here. This forms the cribriform plate, where your olfactory nerves are going to pass through. And right over here, this little tip over here is called the crista galli. Now the ethmoid bone also has another bone feature that goes down to form part of the nasal septum, which is called the perpendicular plate. So the top part of the nasal septum, which is this whole structure over here, is formed by the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. And the bottom half is formed by a tiny slender bone that's called the vomer. So both of them together, the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone and the vomer, form this structure that's called the nasal septum that separates the two nasal cavities. Then over here, we are going to go and talk about the temporal bone. So the first bone feature would be this depression right over here, which is called the mandibular fossa. So the mandibular fossa, even though it has mandibular on the name, belongs to the temporal bone. But that's where the mandibular condyle will articulate, right over there. So mandibular condyle of the mandible and mandibular fossa of the temporal bone. Then on this view, you can see right over here we have the styloid process, which looks like a little styloid pen. Here would be the mastoid process, and both of these processes are good for muscle attachment. Then this hole over here would be the external acoustic meatus, or external auditory canal. So if you have an external auditory canal, it means that you're going to have an internal auditory canal right over here. So if you could follow this to the outside, it would come out right through here. And there's another bone feature that we need to talk about that belongs to the temporal bone, which is the carotid canal. So this hole over here, right next to the jugular foramen, is the carotid canal. Now on this model, it does not go through, but on us, it does go through, because here's where your carotid artery will pass through. This is another model of the skull, and because the features appear a little bit differently here, so I'm gonna be making a video just to show you the differences. So here we have the structure, which is the nasal septum, that's formed by the top part, which is the perpendicular plate that belongs to the ethmoid bone, and the bottom half, which is a bone, the vomer. So perpendicular plate of the ethmoid together with the vomer bone form what we call the nasal septum. And then the other bone feature that's a little bit different on this model is the carotid canal. So on this model, see how you have the jugular foramen right over here? So on top of the jugular foramen, we have the carotid canal. And on this model, it does go through to the other side. So if we could transfer it here, you're going to see where the carotid canal comes out.